Welcome to the Firekeepers, part of the Wired Ape. The series exists because there are people doing the most essential, most underrecognized work in the world, and the conversation they deserve is really the one that they get. So we're trying to be that conversation. I'm Sarah McCoy-Jambo. Today, I'm talking with Sean McLaughlin. Sean is the board chair of the Twin Cities Men's Center in Minneapolis, a nonprofit that has been offering resources for men since 1976. He is also an active anger management facilitator at TCMC and the man writing the grants that keeps the program running. He holds all three of those roles at once. That matters because one of the things TCMC is most serious about is that the men who lead the anger management classes are men who have done the work themselves. Not professionals observing from the outside, but men who have made the same journey and stayed to hold the door open for whoever comes next. The anger management program at TCMC has served more than 3,200 men since 1995. It is court certified, peer-led, and rooted in a model that says you do not have to be a man with anger, but with anger by lecturing him. You help him by putting him in a room with other men who know exactly what he is carrying and have chosen to face it anyway. The program runs for 12 weeks. There's a follow-up course for men who want to go deeper. And some men come back and take the first class again on their own because they take seriously the idea that this is the kind of learning that is a lifelong practice. The Twin Cities Men's Center is approaching its 50th anniversary this fall, 50 years of men helping men. Now, as a woman, I really want to understand what Sean has learned in that room, what he thinks anger is actually carrying, and what he believes would change if more men had access to a circle like the one TCMC has been running for so long. Sean, before we get into the work, I want to say something specific about what has caught my attention. The facilitators at TCMC are men who have been through the program. So that's just not a footnote in the model, that is the model. The fact that you're not just governing this organization, but actually in the room, week after week, making the same journey the people in your care are making, that says something about how seriously you take what you're asking of them. So the other thing that stays with me is the slogan, explore your truth, find your voice. These aren't the words of a compliance program. These are the words of an organization that believes something much larger is possible than reducing incidents. And I want to understand from you exactly where that vision comes from and what that looks like in a room where it actually happens. So a lot of the people who end up doing this work come through a door they didn't choose. How did you come to the Twin Cities Men's Center, and what did you find there that made you stay?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, the way I say it is most men show up when they're in some form of crisis. A lot of men come to the men's center at the low point in their lives, and that is true for me. I was in a marriage that failed. So actually, my story is a little bit different because I ended up going there twice. The first time I took anger management was in the middle of my marriage. I got in an argument with my wife at the time, and I ended up hitting her, and I was shocked. She was shocked. I was shocked. I was raised by a single mom who was a feminist. It's wrong to hit women. It's not something I thought I would ever do, and then I did it, and I didn't understand. And then I thought she'd say, hey, this marriage is over. You got to go. And instead she said, I want you to go see a therapist. And I went to the therapist, and he sent me to my first anger management class. And I learned, I made the mistake the first time of treating the material intellectually. Like I just read it and I'm like, oh, okay, this is pretty straightforward. I understand it. I learned to do what we call timeouts, and I never hit my wife again. And we were married for another 9 years. And, but after the marriage ended and a couple of years really after the marriage ended, what my now ex-wife said to me is, because I would ask her, I would say, do you feel safe? And she would say, yes. I would check in with her. And she said, you used to check in with me. You used to ask me if I was safe. And I'd say yes. And she said, I did feel physically safe, but she said, I didn't feel emotionally safe. And so that really sat with me. But I also ended up in the anger management class the second time because after my marriage ended, I was taking my son to school one day and we got in an argument, and that also turned physical, and the police got involved that time. And so I was actually court ordered the second time. So I kind of hit rock bottom more than once, unfortunately, before the material really took for me. Well, what we teach in the class is that anger is a natural and normal emotion, and it's important to listen to and understand your anger and what it's trying to tell you. And I mean, anger is an emotion that serves to protect us, protect the people around us. If we often get angry at an injustice, that's because someone is being harmed, and so it's important to listen to that. The important thing, what we really teach, is how to slow down, so that instead of reacting, you respond. So you listen to your anger, you process it, and then you find a respectful way to express it to the people around. And so there's a process for that. And we have a set of tools that we teach to get to a regulated state. You really want to express your anger from a regulated state, not from a dysregulated state. So most of the class is about teaching men to become regulated. Yeah. So we started in 76. We started in response to the women's movement, and we were not the only people doing this. There actually was at one point I think it was in the 80s, there was a men's center in every state in the United States. Now they've all shut down, and we're the only one that's still in existence, unfortunately. And I think that speaks to a lot to why men and boys are in crisis right now, because we really don't have a good definition of what healthy, mature masculinity looks like. And we don't have venues for mentoring that or ritualizing that or expressing it or articulating it. And that is what we try to do through it. That's what the Men's Center is about finding ways to help men locate their mature, healthy masculinity, actualizing things like equality in the workforce, equality in education, equality in sports. So the women's movement was externally focused. And then for men, it's the inverse. What we need to do is what we call interior work. And so the Men's Center, I would say that is what is at our center. That's our hub, is interior work. Everything we do kind of revolves around.
So the Confucian tradition carries a teaching from the Great Learning that a man cannot put his household in order until he has cultivated himself first. That arc from the inside out seems to run through everything TCMC does. Is that close to what drives your commitment here, or does it come from somewhere different?
Yeah. So I think, that the change begins from within. That's another way of talking about interior work. So yeah, we don't help men improve their credit score or fill out a job application or, go to the gym and get in better shape. We help them with the way I refer to it is navigate their emotional landscape. So, a lot of men just, they never talk about how they feel. They just they haven't done it for years. They don't have a place to do that. So that's one of the first things we teach. And in the manual that we use in the anger management class, we have a page in the back that has just a list of feeling words, because, men are so lost, they don't even know how to find a word for it. But it's really helpful. They can just look down a page and go, oh, that word, that's how I feel. And I even have guys in my classes who have done things like bring that page to the dinner table so they can sit with their family and say, well, today I feel this way, because it's not something they used to do. And really to navigate your emotional landscape, you want to do that from a regulated state.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would personally argue that without having emotional regulation makes it impossible to achieve. If you don't have emotional regulation, it's impossible to achieve anything else, right? I mean,
Right. Yeah. And you want to be, I think it's important to be in a regulated state. It's also be able to still name and articulate what it is you're experiencing in whatever emotion you're experiencing.
makes everything a lot easier to handle.
Yeah. It's funny because, it's a 12-week class. So the first time guys come in, they're nervous, they're feeling awkward. And we're saying, well, we want you to say how you feel. And, maybe they haven't done it, but maybe by week 3 or 4, they're like, well, do I get just one word? Because I'm feeling 4 different things. And I'm like, hey, man, you could have as many as you want. There was one guy, I called him the Sultan of Feeling Word. He'd have 8 or 12 words at the beginning of class every week.
That's impressive. I aspire to that kind of
Yeah, well, it's really
emotional
interesting to
honesty.
watch that, here it is, like they've never done it. And then once they're given an opportunity and like a set of tools to do it, they just take off and run. They want to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. But you hold 3 roles at once: board chair, facilitator, and grant writer. What does being in the room as a facilitator, actually doing the work yourself, give you that a purely administrative role wouldn't?
Yeah. So the administrative stuff, being board chair, writing grants, I don't like it at all. I don't. It's really tedious, and grant writing is strange. You end up writing things in this language. I'm like, I don't even know what this says anymore. I don't
Mm.
do it by myself. And there's a guy who's a professional grant writer that helps, and he's like, no, this is the right way to say this. I'm like, okay, all right. But doing the classes, helping the men are showing up in crisis. And I mean, certainly in 12 weeks, we're not going to solve someone's crisis. I mean, well, first of all, we can't. They have to solve it themselves. So what we can do is give them a set of tools to work with to do that. But I have seen a number of men who come in the class and they're in crisis, and 12 weeks later, their lives have stabilized. And it's an incredibly rewarding experience. And I had that myself. I was at a very low point, as I said, and by the end of the first class, I felt better, and I immediately took the class again, and then actually the second time, I even started training as a facilitator, and I just wanted to do it more, and I still do. This past winter, I was doing 2 classes a week, and then there was a stretch for about 6 weeks where I was doing 3 a week. And it's kind of exhausting because they're 2-hour classes, and it's really like takes the whole evening between getting over to the men's center and back and making sure I'm ready and all that stuff. And then for this past month, I've just been doing 1 class, and I feel a little lost. It's like 1 class a week is just not enough for me. It gives me purpose and meaning. And I think we all need, it's really hard to function without a sense of purpose and meaning.
For sure, yeah. So could you walk me through what the first night in the room looks like? The
Yeah.
man walks in. What happens? What is it? How does it work?
So the men come in, and as I said, they're usually feeling a little nervous. And of course, I understand it because I've been in that same seat. So I kind of introduce the class, introduce the material. We have certain rules. I go over the rules. And the main thing I explain is that there's kind of 3 ways you get to anger management. You're either what we call court appointed, or we refer to it as wife appointed, or you're self appointed. And by wife appointed, I really mean, your partner, your family, your friends, your boss, sometimes at work, someone is saying, hey, dude, you've got a problem and you need to do something about it. And I think what matters is the appointed part, that there's a kind of a duty, a requirement to do this. But however you got to class is much less important than how you leave. And whether you're court appointed or wife appointed, you can leave self appointed. So that's the way I kind of introduce what we're going to work on. And then the next thing I do is I tell them that I want them to go around and tell their story, what we call their anger story, which is, how they ended up getting to class. And then I go first and I tell my story. And of course, my story is pretty awful and brutal. And I tell it in a way that is honest and accountable, and that models for them how to tell their story. And for the most part, the guys follow suit. That first class can be very emotional. I've seen guys cry in the first class even, but we get close pretty quick because of it. And then we start working through the material that's in the textbook.
So what does a 12-week arc actually look like for the men who take this seriously? What shifts and when does that shift?
Yeah. So not everybody takes the material. I've done this, I think I'm on like class 27 or something. So I've done this quite a few times, and you start to see patterns the more times you do the class. I would say a quarter, maybe 25% of the guys get very little or nothing out of it. That used to bother me. I've come to have peace with that. Maybe another quarter to a third get something out of it, but they don't, what I would say, fully embrace the material. And then maybe that last third, about a third of the guys, like something major happens for them. There's a transformation. And what we say, we teach a set of tools for how to regulate yourself. And the way I explain it is that what makes all the tools work is accountability. Your anger problem is yours. You're personally responsible for your problem. You can't blame it on somebody else. If you do that, none of the tools are going to work. And I think for the guys that really embrace the material, what I see happen, and this is what's happened for me, is that you understand that accountability translates into agency. That by taking accountability, you begin to have agency in your life. And when you see that, when that kind of light bulb moment happens, then you just keep taking accountability, because more accountability means more agency. And those guys, those are the ones who retake the class, take the follow-up empowerment course, become facilitators. It's a beautiful thing when it happens.
So that kind of leads me to my next question. In the Mandinka tradition of West Africa, the griot, the Jali, holds the community's living memory, not through authority, but through having witnessed and survived the most. Their facilitators are men who have taken the same journey as the men they now guide. What does it mean to be led by someone who has already made that passage, rather than someone trained from the outside to observe it?
Yeah, that is a great question. What we do in the class, what all the facilitators do, is we establish that, what happens in class stays in class. And that means a safe space. You can come in, you can talk through an argument with your wife, you can talk through yelling at your kids, you can talk through whatever ugliness your anger has created, and you're not going to be judged. That said, at the center of everything is accountability. So you are going to be held accountable. So what we do is create a safe space that also contains accountability. And that is not a simple thing. That's kind of complex. And the way to do it is to model it, So the fact that we've been through this, that we've made these mistakes, we've been abusive, and we're taking accountability for it as facilitators. And that we know that the process is healing. Doing that is healing. I think it sets an example for the guys and allows them to do the same.
Curriculum also includes units specifically focused on the shame that underlies anger. That's not what most people would expect from an anger management class, though. What made that the center of the deeper work?
Yeah. So in the textbook that we use, there's a section in shame towards the back of the book. And, I felt an immense amount of shame. I hit my wife. I got in a physical altercation with my own child. I have to go to court and take responsibility. I mean, the shame was, frankly, just about killed me. And I'm like, I can't live with this. I have to find something to do with this, but I can't throw it off either. And so we looked at shame in the course, and I read that section in the back of the book a number of times. And then I went to the psychologist that wrote the textbook, and he lives in the Twin Cities. And I said, I'd like to do a class just devoted to shame. Shame, and the alternative to shame, the word we use is empowerment. So, empowerment is essentially not living a shame-based life anymore. And so he and I came up with a curriculum for that follow-up course, and I started teaching that as well. And I think the way he describes it, and I think it's a really good way to describe it, is that an anger problem is like an iceberg, and that part of an iceberg is above the surface and visible. The bulk of an iceberg is below the water. And the visible part of the problem is anger, abuse, control issues. The part that lies below the surface is shame and what we call negative self-talk. And if you don't address the bulk of the problem, you really don't get resolution. You don't get progress. And I've learned to do it, and I've learned by teaching. I've now taught in the follow-up course, I think about 8 times as well. And I see that that men come out of that class really changed. Interestingly enough, my teacher on the second time I went back, he'd been doing it for 20 some years. And the reason he facilitated is because, about every 4 to 6 months, his wife would say, hey, you're kind of drifting into your old unhealthy patterns. You need to go back and do another class. And then, so when the psychologist David Decker and I came up with this shame and empowerment class, I asked him to help me with it. I didn't want to do it by myself. And so he helped me do this class, I think 3 times. And then he said, I think I'm all right. And he hasn't done a class now for 2 years. And I call him every once in a while. We talk on the phone. And I said, so do you want to come back? He says, no, I'm okay. And he says, my wife doesn't say this to me anymore. She doesn't say, you need to go back and do another class. So I think the empowerment class kind of helped him resolve his problem in a big way. Yeah.
Part 2 of the issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, as you mentioned, you work from David Decker's curriculum, but every facilitator brings something of their own into the room. What specific approaches or practices do you rely on most? The ones you found actually move something in the men that you work with?
Yeah. Yeah. So what's interesting about doing the class over and over is that two things happen at the same time. In one sense, I understand the material and the problem and how to address it in simpler terms, and I also see it at the same time in more complex terms. And so the thing that I have learned to do in my classes, the main thing I do now is I just come in and I listen. We refer to it as active listening. So I have learned I say less and less now. I just mostly listen. And I really just try to be open to the men and hear what they're saying and take in both their nonverbal cues. And I just really tune into them. And that to me is the key to doing the class well and helping them. All the guys are different. We come from different walks of life. We have guys who are software engineers. One guy works at a nuclear power plant. One guy is a professional musician. I'm a home builder by trade. What we share is that we all understand our anger problem. We all have an understanding. And there are certainly universal aspects to the problem of anger. And also the other thing we do is we all ground the class in the textbook. We don't drift away from the textbook material because it's written by a licensed psychologist, and we are not licensed psychologists. We're just guys who struggle with anger.
Mhm.
And not only is David Decker a psychologist by trade, but he's regarded as one of the experts on anger in the Midwest. So
Mhm.
his textbook is really good, and he's refined this textbook for 30 some years.
Mhm.
So it's been finely tuned. Yeah.
So the curriculum includes exercises that go beyond discussion. Like men draw a picture of their name and present it to the group. They write letters to their inner child. They examine what the workbook calls governing scenes, formative emotional memories. What does that kind of exercise do that straight instruction alone cannot?
Yeah, the exercises are rather amazing in how they really open up the class. The first thing we do, usually about week 3 or 4, is have guys draw a picture of their anger or just at least create an image. They don't have to draw it. Some people use AI, some people make collages, just something graphic. And I think it does a number of things. One of the first things it does is I think it separates you from your anger. If your anger has an image, so then it's that experience of, my anger is not me, my anger is happening to me, but it's not who I am. And that's really helpful. And usually when they come in and share, it's not just drawing the picture, but it's also sharing the picture with the other men. And, we go around in a circle and everyone shares their drawing. It creates vulnerability. I can't tell how many times that I'm not a very good drawer. I'm not much of an artist. And so, they're kind of already pushed out of their comfort zone by that. And then they often end up telling a story. Then they explain, what the image means to them. They usually tell stories, and a lot of those stories get to what we call governing scenes. So governing scenes are these really usually things that happen to us in childhood that are very emotionally formative. One guy's, this was recent, governing scene was just about him throwing a baseball around with his father. But it's something that like comes back to him almost every day.
So the curriculum also walks men through self-talk and thought distortions, the internal narrative that runs just before anger escalates.
Yes.
How do you teach someone to catch that voice in real time, in the moment, rather than in a classroom setting?
Yeah. Yeah. The key is to slow down. The key is to what we call learn to respond rather than react. If
Mm.
you react, what you're doing is you're falling into your very old dysfunctional patterns. And, those patterns for most of us started way back, probably started pre-verbal, things we learned from our parents before we had words to express ourselves. And so if you just can slow the process down of being triggered, I think that's what Aurelius was talking about when you mentioned him earlier. The term we use is triggered. We get triggered into anger. Once you're triggered, like one of the other guys in class, one of my friends, he says, the first best thing to do when you're triggered is nothing. And if you don't know what to do, do nothing. right? And that just allows you to slow down. And then the thing he says after that is probably the first 4 or 5 things you're going to want to do are petty, and don't do any of those, and
Mhm.
wait. And then something that you can live with will occur to you to do, and then you can do that. But you got to slow down first. You got to let the anger, you got to get back to a regulated state when you get dysregulated, which is what happens when we get triggered.
So every man who completes the program leaves with a personal anger management plan. What does it mean to hand a man someone something like that and send him back into his life?
Yeah, they write their own, we call it escalation prevention plan. They write their own EPPs. And that's just something we do in the last couple weeks of class. Every man has to come in and present his EPP to the rest of us. And then we all give him feedback on it. And it's kind of, it's like an inventory of your anger, what happens to you, what time of day do you often get angry? What people or animals you often get angry around, time of the month, time of the year, what are your cues, all those kinds of things. And then the last stage is, how do you de-escalate yourself? We refer to it as your anger toolkit. So what are your specific tools? And everybody has their own. I mean, we teach a set of tools. To me, it's very similar to what I do in carpentry. Like some young guy will come on the job site and I'll show him the miter box chop saw. And I'm like, well, here's how it works. You put the material against the fence. You start the blade at the top. You let the blade get to full speed before you drop it in the wood. You'll get a nice clean cut. You won't get hurt. So that's the basics. That's how the tool works. But they don't know how to use it. I mean, they're not good with a chop saw. I'm not going to turn them loose and have them, trim out a bunch of doors and windows. They got to work with the saw. And so that's the same thing. We teach the tools, and then the men work with the tools. And so by the time they get to the end of the 12 weeks, they can kind of articulate what their tools are, the things that work best for them, and how they're using them. And I think, they leave the class with an escalation prevention plan. But my hope, and certainly the guys who return and become facilitators, and myself included, we just keep refining that plan.
Mhm.
Like, to me, I've integrated. I don't write it out anymore, but I think I'm modifying my plan every day. Yeah.
Mhm. How do you hold a room where some men choose to be there and others are fulfilling a requirements?
Yeah. I mean, some of the guys that are facilitators got there, they were court appointed. And of course, I was court appointed. So I'm one of those guys. I think when you see that by being accountable for your anger, you can change your life. That was what helps them. Some guys don't. Some guys come in. We refer to them as check the box guys. They follow the rules. They do the minimum that we require them to do to get what we call a certificate of completion. A certificate of completion is what you can bring to the courts and say, yes, I did the anger management course, and they may get very little or nothing out of it. That used to bother me. It used to actually, get me escalated. And I had to work through that. I realized that was my problem, not theirs. And I've come to peace with it. And I think the thing is, like, they're just not ready. They're not ready to do the work. But even if they just check the box, they at least know that the work exists. And when they're ready, maybe they'll come back and do it, or they'll find some other venue for doing it. And I think certainly we don't have the only venue for this. So there are other ways to do it.
So you've spoken a bit about those who attend but don't really get too much out of it. And the other end of the spectrum, of course, are the ones who really benefit from it. So what do men who really benefit from it look like? Not like a success story for the brochure, but the man for whom something real and lasting actually changed.
Yeah. So this I got from another facilitator who's done it much longer than me. And he said, the way he says it is, when you've made progress in this work because other people come up of their own volition and tell you. So he had this with his family and his friends. They're like, dude, you're not the same. I mean, they would say, you used to be scary. Like, I didn't like to be around you. You just had me worried all the time. And I don't feel that way anymore. And he would say this to me when I first started out. I had like sort of envy and John, like, well, no one's come up to me yet and said that. Like, you can't ask for it. It's got to just
Mhm.
happen organically.
Right.
But that's kind of that's one of those indications. I think the other thing is it's not like riding a bike. You don't learn to do it and then you know how. It's much more like learning, speaking another language. So if you learn the language and then at some point, you start thinking in another language. And I think these guys that it really takes with, I see they start thinking in the language of the material that we teach in the class. And I think much like a language too, if you don't speak it for a while, you get rusty. And so we all understand that if we're going to stay fluent, we got to keep speaking this language. And so I think that's why these guys become facilitators. And it's certainly why I do it.
TCMC has served more than 3,200 men since 1995. What does the program know now that it didn't know when it first started?
Yeah. So my first teacher was a guy named John Hesh, and John Hesh ran the anger management program for, I think, 25 years. And I mean, his name and his face and the program, they were kind of synonymous. And, he got old and he just couldn't do it anymore. And he retired and he passed away, I think, 2 or 3 years after he retired. I think he did it just as long as he possibly could. And the program kind of floundered after he left. And I think what we learned is it's not good to be so dependent on one person. So there's a team of us now, and we work very collaboratively, and we back each other up. And I think the program is more sustainable because of that.
How do you track what happens to men after the 12 weeks end? And if not, what do you wish you knew?
Yeah. Well, I do hear from a lot of them after class. So one of the things we do is we have guys call each other outside of class. We distribute everyone's phone number to everyone else in the class, and we encourage them to at least call someone else, one person in the class once, every week. And I call everyone in the class outside of class at least once. And so some of these guys call me back. They especially the guys that are really struggling, they will call me when they're having a hard time. And they call me, when after the 12 weeks is over with too. So I hear from a lot of guys, and I like it. Luckily I work for myself, so somebody calls me in the middle of the day, I can usually, stop what I'm doing and answer the phone. And but I don't hear from everybody. The guys that don't really take to the material, I tend not to hear from them, and I hope they're doing okay, but I don't know.
So you serve men from a wide range of backgrounds in Minneapolis and St. Paul. Different economic situations, different cultural contexts, different communities. Do you find that anger shows up differently depending on where a man comes from? What have you actually seen?
Yeah, actually, I would say no. I would say it doesn't show up differently. It's the anger problem has a lot of consistency to it across socio and economic backgrounds. One of the other facilitators refers to the class as having sort of what he calls a boot camp vibe. Like it is very much like, boot camp where people show up from all different parts of the country, white, black, different economic backgrounds. And we're all thrown in this thing together and we all have to do the same thing, was we just learn to manage our anger. And it works really well. I mean, we have doctors and lawyers, engineers, guys that drive, front loaders, and guys that, like me, that do construction, guys that are nurses, guys that work in factories, guys that don't work. And it's really interesting, because we do this check-in process. So at the beginning of every class, and we have the guys come in and talk about, their escalations in the past week. And I've seen, some guy that drives a forklift trying to comfort a guy who's a doctor or a lawyer and saying, you got to give yourself some grace here. So it's kind of cool the way it works. It levels the playing field.
But are there communities where barriers to doing this kind of work are higher? Or the framework doesn't land the same way, or the skepticism runs deeper?
Yeah. We do work with guys who are transitioning out of prison, and I'd like us to do more with that. And just this year, we started an anger management class for women. I think women have anger too. It shows up differently, takes a different form. We now have a facilitator who is a woman. She's certified by the National Anger Management Association. She moved here from Arizona. She reached out to us, and she's done classes with me, and she's now doing a class all by herself. And she's doing a class that'll be devoted to women. We'll probably start that, I think, in September. I also would really like to do a class on shame for women, because I think in addition to anger, women have a lot of shame, and it would be very challenging. I think it would be a little weird for me as a dude be up in front of a class of women talking about shame, but I think I could talk about my own shame, and I'm hoping I could connect. I like to challenge myself, so it would definitely do that.
It sounds like a great natural next step based on what you're saying.
Yeah.
So when I look at what you do, I see a specific container, like a fixed duration, a facilitator who has made the same journey, men holding each other accountable week after week. In many traditional cultures, that structure is precisely what a ritual is. Do you think about what you're doing as ritual?
Yeah. So I love this question. I know you guys reached out to me, and I know your thing is ritual, and I have to say I didn't think of it as being a ritual until I started talking to you guys about it. But it definitely is. I mean, you come in every week. The first thing we do is the check-in. So in the check-in, you say your name, you say how you feel. You can pick a word from the feeling word page if you can't come up with your own word for how you feel. And then what we have guys do is talk through their escalations for the week, usually one or two. So usually pick the worst, biggest escalations of the week. And then we also talk through victory. So victory is when you could have gotten escalated but didn't, or you got escalated but then you found a way to de-escalate so you didn't get as escalated as you might have gotten. And there's kind of a ritual to this, so we all come in, we check in, we go around in a circle. Guys give each other feedback. We have to ask first, say, can I give you some feedback on your check-in? There's really a ritual to that. There's a rhythm to it. And I see guys really they like the check-in process. And I've seen a number of guys that come in and they'll check in and they're like, I'm upset today. I'm not feeling good, or I'm really tired today. I'm worn out. They come in and their feeling word is kind of negative. And then we also check out at the end of class and they'll give a feeling word at the end of the class. And often, they're like, I'm reinvigorated, or I'm stabilized, or I'm feeling solid, or I'm inspired to go back out. So I think the ritual aspect of it does bring men to that sort of regulated, empowered state. And there's something mysterious about it. I've seen it over and over again. I couldn't really explain how it works, but it does.
Yeah. So that kind of reminds me of Lakota tradition, the Inipi ceremony, the sweat lodge. It
Yeah.
has been long been used to help warriors process what they were carrying before returning to their families and community. And that really sounds like what you were just describing. The understanding is that a man cannot fully be present to the people he loves while still holding what difficulty gave him. Does that idea resonate with the kind of transformation you're trying to support?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So, if you're coming into class and you're talking about your escalations, you're talking about your worst moments, the moments in the past week in which you were the worst version of yourself. And the other thing that happens is, we say, well, come in and talk about escalation. And guys will say, well, okay, it's week 8 or something. I'm like, well, I didn't really have a significant escalation in the past week. So I'm going to talk about, something happened a few years ago. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. That's fine. So there's something that happens when you share those things that, I think your word is container. It gives it a container, and it is very valuable. Yeah.
TCMC's slogan is explore your truth, find your voice. That's not the language of compliance or correction. Where did that vision come from, and what does it mean in the context of a room full of men learning to move through anger?
Yeah, so there have been guys who come in, and interesting number of guys. Interesting, they tend to be more educated guys, and they think that what we're going to do is teach them to sort of put a veneer over their anger, just kind of cover it up, and it's really the opposite. I mean, what you do is by becoming regulated. And also by tuning into your anger, you become the best version of yourself. You also become the most authentic version of yourself. It's really about authenticity, and empowerment is really about authenticity. I think shame takes us away from who we truly are. And so when men learn to exit their shame, anyone learns to exit their shame, where they're headed then is towards their authentic self.
So modern culture has largely removed the structures that used to teach men how to handle powerful emotions in community. Initiation, ritual, elder-led circles. Do you think the TCMC is filling that gap?
I do. I definitely do. We have the anger management program, which is about about half of what we do is anger management. We also have support groups. We have gay men's support group, addiction busters, healthy sexual boundaries, divorced dads. And I think all those things process. We also have affiliation with the Mankind Project. Now, the Mankind Project is not something I know that much about. Other guys in the organization are really, they're big Mankind Project facilitators, but Mankind Project is big on ritual, definitely.
And of course, you've mentioned that there are men who stay to become facilitators, which is, of course, extraordinarily valuable. They're giving something back in a way that most programs really never cultivate. So, what does that pipeline tell you about what men need beyond that 12 weeks session?
Yeah, I mean, everybody has their own reasons for being facilitators, but I would say that all of us get a sense of meaning and purpose out of it. I think if you have the experience of having an anger problem and watching it take a toll on your life, and then learning a way to deal with that, and it's transformational, it's healing. You begin to repair relationships. One of the other facilitators, I think this is his story, but he's given me permission to tell it. He took anger management, I think, 2 or 3 times, and he felt like he was making some progress, and then he stopped for a while. And he had a son. I think his son was a teenager, and he didn't live with it. His parents had split, so his son spent half his time with him and half his time with his mom's house. He was cleaning his son's room one day and he found a diary entry, and he's like, I think it was, dad is scary and I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm just always worried dad's going to just explode on me. And, he just found this written on his son's desk, and it just decimated him. And so he went in. This is when John Hesh was still there, and he just went in the office, and Hesh was there, and he's like, man, I don't know what to do. He told him what he'd read, and Hesh just gave him a hug and said, just come on back to class. And that was his transformational moment. That was his rock bottom. And I think he's been doing it now for 8 years. I think once you have that experience of someone helping you recover in that way, you want to give it to somebody else. You want to do that for
Mhm.
someone else.
So, what do you think most people get wrong about anger management?
Yeah, I think, and I think I did this myself, that the idea of regulating was the idea of becoming phony, becoming a fault person, that regulation was sort of performative. And really, if you really do regulation, it's not performative. It leads to authenticity. I think some people misunderstand that. I would also say, I think the other thing is that because it's, I think we do anger management, but I've also changed to saying, navigating our emotional landscape. I also sometimes say, navigating our volatile emotions. But the truth is, every emotion is volatile. Even joy is volatile. When my son was born, it was probably one of the most joyful moments of my life. And I remember, being in the room and holding him and just feeling overwhelmed with joy and love. And also, it was volatile because I was terrified. I've got
Yeah.
this really delicate creature, and I'm in charge of taking care of this incredibly vulnerable thing. And I don't have a clue how to do that. I've never done it
Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
So even joy is volatile. And the fact that joy is impermanent, is also makes it volatile. It can go away. So I think all emotions are volatile. And I would say that is something that a lot of people don't understand. I would also say, I guess there's another part. It's a great question
Yeah.
that I think every man has an anger problem. I used to say that in class. Some of the guys didn't like it, so I've changed it. And what I say now is that every man has either learned to manage anger or he hasn't learned it yet. So I think we think of, anger management as something for men who are on the extreme ends of society, really dangerous, volatile men. But I mean, I've heard enough stories. There's volatility in almost every household.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you kind of have mentioned this, but how do you work with men who believe that anger is the one emotion they are allowed to feel? Men for whom anger has been doing all of the emotional work for a long time.
Yeah, I think that if anger has done all their emotional work for them, they're exhausted. And I think as soon as they see us model that you can do more than that, they often feel relieved, and they walk right through that door. It doesn't take a lot of convincing.
It's
Yeah, There's guys who in class are saying, they come in and say, thank God for the World Cup. Like I had a really bad week, but thank goodness for the World Cup.
Who in your world dismisses what you do, and what do you wish they understood?
I'm kind of an open book, and I don't experience a lot of dismissal. The only thing I would say is that what I do for a living is remodel, mostly kitchens and bathrooms. So I'm working in other people's homes, and if I'm doing a kitchen, that takes 3 months. So I get to know my client, and they get to know me pretty well.
Mhm.
And I don't typically share that I facilitate anger management classes in the first couple weeks of a project because I
Mhm.
think it could get misunderstood. I think
Right.
after a while, when I've been in their house and they can see that, I'm a safe person, then I share it. I've learned to share it, but I don't share it right away. And I think it's because it could be misunderstood. It could be frightening there's now an angry man in my house. He has a key to my house. I'm
Right.
writing him checks for thousands of dollars and making really big decisions with him. This is a bad idea. Yeah. So I time that, I guess.
Mm, makes sense. So, what do you think is the hardest thing about doing this work as a volunteer, not as a credentialed professional?
Yeah, actually, I really like doing it as a volunteer, and I don't think I could ever be a therapist. I don't think I have the patience to be a therapist. In therapy, and I mean, I'm speaking in generalities here, you kind of wait for your client, your patient to come to their truth. And, I that can take years, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no way I could be a therapist to an angry man and watch him take years to come to the fact that he has an anger problem.
Mm,
I mean, like, I think I would be like, dude, do you not see yourself taking a toll on the people around you? You know, you ever ask them, you ever ask them how they feel when you yell at them?
yeah. Yeah.
And there are guys who come from in class and they're in denial. And that used to trigger me. I would get upset. I've actually had to take timeouts and walk out of the room.
Mm,
It's really good that we usually have two facilitators, so the class could keep going. But I've learned how to process that. I've learned how to deal with that too. It's part of my own work. But I would never learn to be patient with it.
mhm,
Guys will do a check in and find some way to kind of deny that they were angry
mm,
and I would say, "Well, I can see you're still in denial." I'll say something like that, and I'll just leave it alone. Yeah. I try not to judge them, but I can't wait for them.
mhm. No beating around the bush or anything like that.
Yeah. And if that was what my profession required, then I'm really glad I'm not a professional.
But you're doing a lot of work for TCMC. You're running this on grants and volunteer labor. What are the practical barriers to keeping the programs running and getting men through the door? And what would change if those barriers weren't there?
Yeah, we're a nonprofit, and we do rely on grants, and grants are hard to get, and the grant application process is a painful process for a lot of reasons. What I would hope to see, I think we're kind of a unique nonprofit in the fact that we have kind of an income generating entity within ourselves. The anger management program charges tuition for the classes, and we bring about, I think, 42 or 44% of annual revenue comes from the anger management program. I would like to bump that up to about 80 or 85%. I would like to expand the program and get more guys coming in, taking the classes. I think it would benefit the community if there were more regulated men out there in the community, and it would financially stabilize the men's center. So that's my hope.
So, are there men out there who need this work and can't access it because of what it needs, what it costs, where it is, or how it's framed?
We have a scholarship program for guys who can't afford it. We don't end up using it too often. The scholarship maybe pays half the tuition, but we need some guys to have some buy-in. So I think they at least pay half the cost of the class, gives them buy-in. I think I'd like us if we could reach more women. There are women that have found out I'm in anger management, and they have really queried me about what that means and what we do, and so I could see there's an interest among women as well to find a healthy way to process their anger and shame too. I'm sure, and I think the one thing that I've also noticed is that most of the guys in the class are older, and the guys that get the most out of the class tend to be older, tend to be middle-aged. And I think it's because when you're young and you have moments of anger, you can regard it as a one-off. And then as you get older and it happens more often, then you see it's a pattern, and then you can see that that pattern is sourced in you. Guys will say, well, I don't have an anger problem. It's just that my girlfriend keeps pissing me off. And when they're on their third girlfriend and they're saying that, they're like, yeah, maybe it's not her. Maybe it's me. So the younger guys, although we have some young guys, well, the young guy's a facilitator. And so that's not always the case, but it tends to be the case.
What does this work cost you personally? You're a volunteer doing this alongside the rest of your life. So what does sustained contact with men in real difficulty require of you?
For me, it actually shores me up. I think I kind of talked about that earlier, that when I was doing 2 or 3 classes a week, I'm in good shape. And when I go down to 1 a week, I feel a little more lost, sort of disconnected from my center. One of my friends who's not an anger management coordinator likes to use the term soul work. This work is good for my soul. I consider this work to be soul work. And so it shores me up and it sustains me. And luckily, I can afford to do it. I can afford to put the time in, and I have the flexibility of working for myself.
TCMC grew out of the Men's Awareness Network in the Twin Cities in 1973. Who are the people who built this place, and what were they trying to do that the world wasn't offering men at the time?
Well, I think a lot of those guys are no longer around. That's 50 years
It's
ago,
fair.
and they're probably middle-aged or older
Right.
at the time. There are some guys who have been at the men's center. They're aging out too, and they've been there for 20, 25, 30 years, and they've kept it going. I would say, what we do is the term I use is interior work. We do interior work, and I think that's what we've learned is what men need to do to sustain themselves, to get themselves to a healthy place. It's not what our culture at large encourages men to do. Our culture at large really encourages men to be externally focused. And so I think that's why we've lasted 50 years, is because we are offering interior work, and there's few places for men to get that.
So you mentioned 50 years. It's really impressive. And of course, you have the
Yeah,
anniversary celebration
I
coming
can't
up
take
this
credit.
month.
Yeah.
People like you, though, right? So what does 50 years of this
Yeah.
work represent to you?
Yeah, I feel an obligation to carry on the work that other guys have done. So I have a sense of duty, and I think I'm not the only one who feels that way.
TCMC has almost reached the 50th anniversary. What does that represent to you? What does 50 years of this work represent to you?
Yeah. What it means to me is that we have a platform for articulating and expressing what I would call a healthy and mature masculinity, and I think it's terribly needed in society. I mean, the other day I found a list of the terms that the manosphere uses. It's just one disturbing term after another. The manosphere I see as sort of adolescent masculinity on steroids. Like they're celebrating this sort of raw, unadulterated masculinity that isn't balanced with any kind of femininity. I mean, a mature man is a combination of masculinity and femininity. Being vulnerable, talking about how you feel. Those are, generally speaking, feminine traits. And, you become a well balanced, healthy man when you can do both. I think any man that I look at that models healthy masculinity is a combination of masculine and feminine. Is a healthy, properly balanced mixture. And masculinity is important. Masculinity is valuable. I think you've got the manosphere, which is kind of on the political right, advocating for this weird, toxic masculinity. But then you've also got the left that just kind of sort of regards all masculinity as bad. And, someone's got to build the bridges and the homes and fix the automobiles and just, doing hard things. And also, I think there are women with healthy masculinity. My partner is one of them. She's a philosophy professor. Sure. She's a really good thinker. She operates in the world of reason and logic. And, and she can fix her own dryer too.
Mhm.
And so a healthy, mature woman is also a combination of masculinity and femininity. So I think we've been around 50 years. It hopefully gives us some authority to talk about this, and I hope we find ways to broadcast our message better.
So, what would you want the next generation of men who do this work to understand that the field is still figuring out?
So there's a quote that I like. It's from a man named E.O. Dobbs. He was a biologist at Harvard, and he says the problem with the world is we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. And I think that's a really succinct way to describe a large set of problems. And he said that I think 15 years ago, and I think it's just all the more true now. What I thought was interesting about it was that what he regarded as a solution to that problem was to evolve the institutions. And I think there's something to that. I think there's a value in that. I think better institutions are valuable. I think better policy is valuable. But I also think, why do we have to stick with Paleolithic emotions? I mean, we have neuroplasticity. We don't have to be stuck back in the Stone Age in terms of how we navigate our emotional landscape. And I would say that my emotional terrain has changed. I mean, what happens to me when I get triggered is not what happened to me when I got triggered 5 years ago. I do just really respond. My emotions are different. My emotions have changed. I think as we do this work, and especially the guys that do it over again, take the follow-up class, the guys who facilitate, they're doing what I call emotional learning. So you can learn cognitively, you can learn intellectually, but you can also learn emotionally, and we can evolve our emotions. And I would like that, like the generations that are coming up, if they see that, understand it, and learn how to do it, I think it'll solve a lot of problems in this world.
Right. Absolutely, for sure. So, Sean, what I took away from this conversation is the idea that the man who has been through it is often the right guy for the man who is about to go. Not because he has a credential, not because he can name what happened in a clinical language, but because the journey was real and the room can feel that. 50 years of men learning this from each other in a converted space in Minneapolis without much fanfare and without much recognition is an incredibly important thing that I had come across in doing this podcast. So, Sean, I want to thank you for speaking with me today. The work at the Twin Cities Men's Center is exactly the kind of thing the Firekeepers exist to make visible. You can find out more at tcmc.org and on social media platforms. If you're a man, or if you know a man for whom something in today's conversation rang true, this is the place to go. And if you want more of what the Wired Aid is building, you can find us there too.